Hockey heads, fantasy fanatics, and degenerate offseason gamblers, welcome back to your source for offseason news, the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And on today's episode, there is no shortage of hot topics to get to, including a little bit of a recap on the draft from could have been the most exciting one we've seen in a long, long time. We also have to talk about the Vegas Golden Knights, Reilly Smith on the move, Barbashev gets the bag, and what's going on with these Detroit Red Wings. Thank you for joining us. Let's get right to it.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What a busy offseason we have already had, hockey fans, and thank you so much for joining us for the Friday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I am joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Mr. Steel Roden. You can check out his work all across YouTube under NHL Quick Hits and all across the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Network. I'm your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. Make sure you check me out all across YouTube as well and anywhere you need your fantasy hockey content. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. A championship team is all about each player being the perfect fit, and it's the exact same with your vehicle. So for parts that you need, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Steel, you know that's a bit of a mouthful for me off the top to get it out. It's been a long week. Thank you for always riding with me through these tough weeks through the summer, but it's been a fun couple of days for us. Lots of NHL news coming down the pipeline. And on today's episode, you and I need to talk a little bit about this draft. Fantilli, Michkov, Bedard. There's some interesting little takeaways here, especially those three. I want to talk about that. Reilly Smith on the move. Barbashev gets the bag. Yamamoto and Kostin to Detroit, and there's also some rumblings about DeBrincat to Detroit. Let's talk about all of it on today's episode. But very firstly, we are grateful and lucky to have you holding us down every single episode. Make sure, if you are feeling it, head over to Spotify, Apple, wherever you at. Hit us with that 5-star review if you are feeling it. And if you're not, let us know what else you need to make sure you dominate that draft. Now I'm done, Steel, with the preamble. I'm going to turn it over to you because there is a lot to talk about. And shouts to you for making sure that we do hold down this draft recap a little bit. What did you see? Any takeaways from you? Because I do want to talk about this Michkov situation. But what else were you seeing?
Yeah, well, first of all, just right off the bat, just an incredible venue in Nashville. And just, the amount of respect that David Poile received from all of his fellow GMs across the league. That was amazing to see, and also see him pass the torch over to Barry Trotz to make his first pick as a general manager. And Poile's just been a part of this league for over 40 years. So kudos to all the fellow GMs that praised and show their respect to a legend in the GM business in the National Hockey League. But this was an absolute incredible first round draft class, and just draft class overall. Obviously, Connor Bedard taken first overall. Speaking fantasy wise for Connor Bedard, if you're in a keeper dynasty league, he's a first round pick. You want him pretty much right away.
He's the first pick.
I don't know if he's the first pick. I don't know if he's the first pick. I would still be taking Connor McDavid over Connor Bedard right now.
But he's a keeper, right? None of those guys are going to be in dynasty leagues. He's not out there. As a keeper dynasty, definitely Bedard is the first off the board this year. But I hear what you're saying. If there's some other maybe more peripheral keepers. Anyway, keep going. My bad.
When we're talking about regular leagues as well, if we're talking regular leagues, third or fourth round this next season, probably because Connor Bedard is NHL ready. He will be the number one guy in Chicago. And then you go to the number 2 and the number 3 pick. Leo Carlsson goes to Anaheim. Adam Fantilli goes to the Columbus Blue Jackets. It will be interesting to see if Anaheim and Columbus choose to throw them into the lineup next season. Obviously, we've got to see what it's like at draft camps or at camps. In the preseason as well. But it would be very interesting to see Adam Fantilli and Leo Carlsson play next season for the respective clubs. And then I know you want to talk about this guy, Matvei Michkov, taken 7th overall by the Philadelphia Flyers. He slid down the board a little bit, obviously because of the uncertainty with his contract with the KHL. up until 2026.
Exactly.
But the Flyers felt comfortable enough to draft him at 7th and figure out that process, figure it out, and figure out the process later about how to get him maybe playing in the NHL a little bit earlier than when his KHL contract ends up. But overall, it was a very interesting draft class, and it was just a very interesting draft. To me, it was just the directness and the straightforwardness of this draft. I thought that we would see a little bit of a few teams try to trade up in this draft, get a little bit of a higher pick and maybe some chaos, but it was just a very straightforward draft. And just didn't see anyone make any trades or try to trade up. We didn't see that. It was very straightforward, and I think that goes to show the amount of depth in this draft class.
Definitely an interesting draft night, Steele. And, where I do want to start, and we're going to keep this draft takeaway short because there is a lot more we want to get to.
Well, I do have one other take, but I want to hear what you have to say.
No, 100%. I'm just, I got to tee this up for the folks out there. Friday, also happy Canada Day for all our Canadians out there coming up this weekend. Make sure you enjoy yourself and stay safe out there. But at the end of the day, I got a few good quotes for you, Steele. I'm going to the quote bin for this episode. And number one, I think you and I can agree. Danny Briere already working a nice little job here in Philly. And here's his quote about Michkov, because all we heard going into this draft, Steele, personality issues. Does he have, issues between the ears, a little bit the attitude problem, which is obviously a concern for an 18-year-old guy who also, because of all the political drama, no one's been able to really see Michkov play many games. That's been a limited thing, and another one getting in the way of him going higher. 18 years old, 5'10". Here's Briere's quote: blown away by his personality. He kept saying all he wanted to do was be a Flyer. In 30 games in the KHL at 18 years old, Steele, he had more points per game than Alex Ovechkin. So I'll throw that stat out there. Am I saying he's going to be Ovi? Absolutely not. But when you read about this guy's offensive abilities, when he does come around, you and I, hopefully we're still doing this show in 2 or 3 years, I have a feeling we'll be very high on this Michkov kid from his offensive ability, and maybe that's all you need from a guy this talented.
Yeah, and there was a lot of praise around his scoring ability as well, obviously in the offensive zone. It's really hard to score in the NHL, and Michkov is a goal scorer, and that's something to look forward to for when he does make his NHL debut with the Philadelphia Flyers and develop and progress his game at the NHL level. The one pick from the draft that really stuck out to me, though, was Winnipeg's draft pick in the first round, 18th overall, Colby Barlow. The way all of the analysts and reporters spoke about this kid was unbelievable. His character, the way he handles himself on and off the ice. At 18 years old, he's already a true natural born leader, and that's why he was named the youngest captain in Owen Sound attack history. So this kid has the skill level. 46 goals, 79 points in 59 games last year. 30 goals for 47 points the year prior to that. They were saying that this could be the next captain of the Winnipeg Jets. He was a projected top 10 draft pick. He fell all the way to 18, and I don't think the Winnipeg Jets could have been happier with their first-round selection. Kevin Cheladeoff just had a grin from ear to ear when he was shaking Colby's hand, and it was just awesome to see with everything that's kind of broken down for the Winnipeg Jets the last few weeks.
No kidding. And doesn't it make sense, though, that they hire a kid with leadership aspirations and abilities, because their leadership group sounds like they're all out the window, Steele, and they're bringing in really good young pieces.
Yes, they are.
So they're not exactly, I'm not calling it a rebuild, because also until Connor Hellebuck goes somewhere else and Mark Scheifele goes somewhere else, which I think I alluded to yesterday and Wednesday, that I don't think I'm 100% sure that happens now, because like I said, again, now these moves, if I'm Scheifele and Hellebuck, I'm a little bit intrigued to see what camp looks like. I'm a little bit intrigued to see what the kids can do. And maybe you knock at that door again. Look, the playoffs and the Stanley Cup are tough. And saying that you can change teams, change cities, and change franchises and go on a run, that's a lot easier said than done. Whereas if you're with the Winnipeg Jets, who just, say what you will, they were in the playoffs last year. So anyway, loving these moves from the Jets. Thank you for highlighting that. We're going to get to break in a second. We're going to talk about Reilly Smith, Yamamoto, and Kostin to Detroit. We're going to talk about Barbashev and DeBrincat looking like he might be a Red Wing. But very quickly and lastly, Steele, Adam Fantilli played this year at Michigan, 65 points in 36 games. He played at the World Juniors, 5 points in 7 games. He played at the World Championship with men. And yeah, he had 3 points in 10 games, but he didn't look out of place. The Columbus Blue Jackets, another team who have been very active. All I want to say is Adam Fantilli might get a decent look. Maybe not this year, but definitely next year to make this team. And I don't see him, why not make the team this year? They are in flux. Maybe he's the fourth line center. I don't know what they do. I just wanted to shine a little bit of light on Fantilli. I don't know if you have a take on the Hobey Baker Award winner, but I'm good to go to break if you don't.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat. I think it's very interesting to see what Columbus, the second and third overall pick in this draft, what both Anaheim and Columbus are going to do. Do they want to send Fantilli back to Michigan for another year to develop his game while they, sort of figure things out in Columbus, or do they get him in NHL level hockey right away? That's the big question mark right now. We already know Connor Bedard is going to be playing for Chicago, but who else in this draft class will be following him in the rookie season?
There is also just so much more to talk about throughout the summer. You mentioned Connor Bedard's value. Let's get to the rest of today's episode in a hot minute. But today's episode is brought to you by our friends at AG1. And you need to be checking out AG1 before and after the gym. Seal and I love it in the smoothies in the morning, or you can just drop it in 1 cup of water, and it helps you all the time. This is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers comprehensive nutrients to support whole body health. AG1 replaces your multivitamins, your probiotics, and in one simple drinkable habit. It's a science-driven formula of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food source nutrients. AG1, raising the standard for quality in the supplement game. You got to be checking these guys out, Steele. You know we love AG1. It helps you with your mental acuity. It helps you stay sharp at work. It helps you stay focused. And, of course, it supports your gut health. It's a comprehensive solution that you need in your supplement routine. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Make sure you're going over to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. You got to be checking it out today and make sure you're mixing it in that pre-workout smoothie.
And thanks so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the follow button. We appreciate all that love and support you show us. And we are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your favorite podcast on your favorite podcast platform, including your favorite team from all 4 major sports leagues and the NCAA. We appreciate all that love and support out there. So thank you so much. And real quick, before we get to the Vegas Golden Knights Pittsburgh Penguins trade, I think by far, I gotta say this, by far the funniest and best part of that draft class or draft, venue, the draft night, was Carey Price freezing while trying to remember David Reinbacher's last name. And then later in the round, when Pekka Rinne was up there on the stage, he was having a little fun poking some mockery jokes towards Carey Price's way. But I thought that was absolutely hilarious.
I love that.
And Carey Price took it like a champ, went straight to Twitter and joked around, made fun of himself a little bit. But I thought that was hilarious from Carey Price.
Carey Price was a goaltender in Montreal. He can take the heat from whoever. But at the end of the day, Steele, also sometimes drafts are just like super boring when they shouldn't be for the NHL. When you look at like how much hype comes around the NBA and NFL drafts. I'm not trying to compare the NHL to those leagues, but it was nice to see, some of those moments, some of those viral moments, and just also really good players. And Nashville, what a great spot to host it. But Vegas Golden Knights making some moves. What are you thinking about the Reilly Smith move, number 1, before we talk about, I think we saw the Barbashev signing coming. We just didn't really know who was going to be the odd man out. Look, I'm not going to hate on this deal. I understand it 100%. So I'm not going to say Vegas made a mistake here. It's just Reilly Smith at 32 years old. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins are getting a really good player here that still holds, back end fantasy draft value at that, 50 to 55 to maybe on a good year, 60-point value.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. I think it's an A+ trade for the Pittsburgh Penguins. All they have to give up is a 2024 third round pick. And we know Kyle Dubas likes to trade away his picks and, acquire some depth players for his team, and that's exactly what he's done. Smith is a very consistent player, averages 55 points a year, 170 shots, 40 to 50 blocks and hits. He's great shorthanded on special teams as well, gets second power play unit from time to time, and his ADP is 221.8, so that's round 17 for fantasy leagues. I think that's more than accurate. I think you could probably take him in the 16th. From what I've seen in the leagues that I've been in, I've seen him taken 17th round. I've seen him taken 15th round, but I think anywhere in those late stages, 15, 16, 17 is the perfect place to pick him. If you can get him later than that, that's an A+ for you. But Reilly Smith brings a lot of fantasy value. I had him on my fantasy hockey team. He was one of those sneaky underlying players. I think Flip and I probably talk about Reilly Smith every 2 weeks on this episode for Monday waiver wires. Like, he's always on the waiver wire for some reason, and we love picking him up. So he's one of those guys that I always go back to. Flip goes back to as well whenever we kind of trade him in and out from our lineup, it seems like. But I love the situation for both Vegas and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh gets Reilly Smith. Vegas signs Ivan Barbashev to a 5-year, $25 million deal.
Reilly Smith also, as much as he is not a physical guy, would it shock you to throw out that he had 70 hits last year, Steele? And I know, look, 11 penalty minutes, 16 penalty minutes, it's not a ton, but he has a little bit of peripheral value. And considering how good of a skater he is, and he's an offensive piece, I don't hate those peripherals. Are you drafting him for hits and block shots? Of course not. But 4 game-winning goals, I think he had like 6 or 7 power play goals as well, Steele. And at the end of the day, I think what I like the most by this Dubas move, he's under contract at a very fair $5 million for the next 2 years. So, he's 32. So if you were bringing him in and he had 4 or 5 more years under a long-term deal or something at a little higher, I'd be like, I don't know about this. But given that they paid nothing, he's under contract, he can still bring it, and they're bringing a little bit of balance to an offensive attack that last year at times really didn't have that bite. I'm loving it. Let's move to Barbashev. What's your take on this situation? Because I think we saw this one coming.
Yeah, we saw this one too. And like you said, it was hard to pinpoint who the odd man out would be for the Vegas Golden Knights, because they definitely wanted to keep him, and they wanted to keep him for a long time. You can go back and forth about the actual contract that he got. Maybe $5 million is a little bit too much, because maybe they're going heavily on that playoff run he just had. 18 points in 22 games, or 16 points he had in the playoff run. So he had a really good
Reilly Smith
run.
had 14. Reilly Smith had 14
Reilly Smith
was just throwing that out there.
Wasn't too far behind Ivan Barbashev, but what I really think that separates them is that physicality that Barbashev brings to the table. Both in the regular season and in the playoffs. He's just one of those guys who can really make a difference with that physicality that he has, and it doesn't affect them in a negative way. He's very smart with when he goes to finish a check and how he finishes his checks. He doesn't raise his elbows, doesn't raise his hands, doesn't lead with anything. He's a very smart physical player, but he has some offensive side to his game. We've seen it in the past with St. Louis, and obviously it was a tough year for St. Louis last year, but we've seen Ivan Barbashev have really good seasons the past 3 years. 2021, he had 60 points in 81 games. Last year, 45 points in 82 games, splitting time between St. Louis and Vegas. 2 back-to-back really good seasons. Maybe $5 million a year is a little bit too much, but I think that's up for debate.
Yeah, it's up for debate. And I think my main point that I wanted to mention when talking about this player is let's be very wary of that playoff pump. That all we saw from him in the playoffs, right? Like, he was great, but let's not overreach for him in this next fantasy draft is all I want.
I think you could take him pretty much wherever you want to take him with Reilly Smith. I think those two guys fall in the same sort of categories.
Same area,
same rounds. Yeah, same area, same sort of rounds, 16, 17, 18. Different styles of game, but the physicality that Barbashev brings balances out the point production fantasy-wise. So I think both Barbashev and Reilly Smith could easily go 16, 17.
Yeah, and honestly, I would maybe lean toward Reilly Smith, given that he might be playing with Malkin. He might get some looks with Sid. There's going to be some really potentially studly offensive mixes for Reilly Smith. But I hear you 100%. At the end of it all, though, Barbashev getting paid. This was a move that made sense for the Golden Knights. Both of them were just really, really solid in the postseason. Also, I think what's Barbashev's age? Because I think that's where it tips the
27.
scale.
27.
That's where it might tip the scale here, right? 4 years on Reilly Smith. You're trying to keep this going in Vegas, a team that does have a lot of veterans, right? So for me, it makes a whole ton of sense, Steele. Shout out to Reilly Smith and Barbashev, Stanley Cup champs. Where do you want to go from here? Let's head to break. Maybe we got a lot more to talk about. What are we talking about next?
We do have to talk about the Detroit Red Wings potential trade and a trade they accomplished with the Edmonton Oilers over the last couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. We appreciate all that love and support. Make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning is when you can find all of our hot episodes out here with your boy Flip Livingstone and Steel Road. And Edmonton Oilers trade away Kailer, Yamamoto, and Klim Kostin to the Detroit Red Wings for future consideration. So Detroit Red Wings, pretty much nothing. But the Red Wings get two, I guess you could call them depth guys. I don't really know what to call them. Like they're still pretty young, but they're bottom six forwards. Maybe Yamamoto is a second line right winger, but that's up for debate. For me personally, that's not really anything for either team. I think it just fills in some positions for the Detroit Red Wings, figuring out where their future lies before they make a bigger trade with the Ottawa Senators potentially. But for me, Klim Kostin and Kailer Yamamoto pretty much bring absolutely zero fantasy value.
Man, zero fantasy value. Like, I'm not here to argue that topic. I'm not here to also say to make a case to make Kailer Yamamoto a draftable player, because obviously Klim Kostin is not. Klim Kostin, though, had a good postseason. You know, he showed that he can play the game of hockey. So one of these conversations that you and I like to have, sometimes we got to separate the fantasy value from what it might actually do for the Detroit Red Wings on the ice. Because for making this team more balanced and adding a little bit more experience and adding, you know, a guy who can score in Yamamoto and a guy who can bring a bit of offense and some of that heavy body at times, I actually like this move for the Detroit Red Wings, especially because it cost them nothing, Steele. And are they still 2 or 3 years away from making real noise? Of course. I especially was very high on the moves they made in the offseason, and they fell short again. But lots to like. Lot of good young players. Rasmussen, Seider, Raymond, obviously Larkin, Robbie Fabry injury, Kubalik. There's a lot of uncertainty as well with this lineup. So what I want to do is just leave it at this. Ken Holland, and you know, I had a couple of quotes. First one, Klim Kostin is apparently almost ready to get sniped by the KHL. Ken Holland said he was negotiating with KHL numbers and he could just not afford to pay Klim Kostin what he might get in the KHL. So remember that as well, because I believe he is a pending RFA. So he could be gone. Kailer Yamamoto, though, makes sense for me to balance out the offensive attack. Second, the next quote from the same man. If the cap was 86 or 87 million, it could have worked out. I wouldn't have needed to make more moves. Skinner is due a raise. McLeod is due a raise. Bouchard is due a raise. And I made a deal for Ekholm at the deadline, so I have to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Here's the sacrifice, but I'm okay with it, Steele. It also, and I'll leave it at this, opens up $3.2 million in cap space for the Edmonton Oilers to make some moves. And I think you made a good point. The goaltending isn't going to be addressed. They have enough money invested in them now. They're going to run back Skinner and Campbell. I would like to see them make a move on the blue line, another guy, and maybe another depth bottom six forward. Maybe he can squeeze them both in for the 3.2, but it makes sense, right? The salary dump.
Yeah, it makes sense for the Edmonton Oilers. They needed to move some guys, and obviously Yamamoto at $3.1 million for the next year is just a guy who hasn't really panned out, and a few guys who haven't panned out for the Oilers over the last few years as well. Right. So good move by the Edmonton Oilers for a salary dump and figure out what player they want to attack and maybe look at for this offseason, maybe on the blue line or a depth player, like you said. For the Detroit Red Wings, though, they got $27.5 million in cap space. And one of those guys that they can spend a little bit of money on could be Alex DeBrincat, making a trade with the Ottawa Senators, maybe a sign-in trade. Get him at 8.5, 8.7, somewhere where Dylan Larkin is right now. And How great would that be? See Dylan Larkin, Alex DeBrincat, and Lucas Raymond on a top line together in Detroit.
Also, the Detroit Red Wings have 2 first-round picks next year. They have a stock draft board. They have their second, third, fourth. They have their first, second, and third in the following year still. The Detroit Red Wings, for me, we talked about this a little bit, I think, when we mentioned the Chicago Blackhawks franchise. Yeah. The Detroit Red Wings will not be bottom feeders for very long. They are also an Original Six franchise, and they will be back being very competitive very soon. And I think what's starting to happen here is it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like they're adding some low risk, potential high reward situations. Is Kailer Yamamoto going to make the difference for them next year? No. But bringing in Alex DeBrincat, that might really start to tip the scales in this team's favor. This is also not a rumor you and I have like stewed up. This is coming from Darren Dreger. This is one of the top NHL analysts in the business. And it makes sense, right? So I think at the end of the day, this is more a formality to me. I know that's a little bit of a reach because it's only rumors. I see DeBrincat in a Detroit Red Wings uniform before the start of this season.
I see it as well. And, you know, there is that connection to Michigan for Alex DeBrincat.
Boom.
And it just seems like that's the obvious direction that he will be going. You know, obviously he's thrown in a few teams. I know the Dallas Stars have been linked to Alex DeBrincat as a potential destination, obviously Detroit, but I think Detroit makes the most sense. They've got the most cap space. Yeah. And looking at the way that Steve Yzerman, again, praising the manager here, the general manager,
good point.
The way that Steve Yzerman has managed this team, the only bad contract that I see right now is Andrew Kopp. And I'm talking like nitpicking here. There's no bad contract. You've got Dylan Larkin locked up for the next 7 years, 8 years. You know, you've got pretty much everyone else under contract for 3 or less. That gives you the flexibility for these entry-level contract guys like Lucas Raymond, like Moritz Seider, like a few draft picks who they just made in the 2023 draft.
Rasmussen is also nasty.
Rasmussen. And then, you know, signing a guy of Alex DeBrincat's skill level as well. So the management and Steve Yzerman has just been world-class like from him. And again, like you said, the Detroit Red Wings are not going to be bad for long.
$5.6 million cap hit for Andrew Kopp was a bit of a stretch. He also just really disappointed heavily last year.
He was bad last year.
Maybe, you know, there's that combination with he was overpaid. Sure. Stevie Y doesn't miss very often, and watch Andrew Kopp come back and make Stevie Y look real good this year. This will be one of I'm not coming down the conversation of I'm selling you on drafting Andrew Kopp. I would just put him under the category of players that don't expect him to be that bad again, because he just brings a little bit of everything. And if the rest of this team improves like we expect him to, especially if they add another piece, why wouldn't we expect him to have another good or a better year? Anyhow, I am just really excited, Steele, for the rest of this offseason. This past week has been, you know, on fire. We will be back for a fire-loaded Monday episode. That's July 1st, isn't it?
July 1st is July 1st is the weekend.
So coming in hot on Monday for the 3rd, because there will be a number more deals and signings, you know, that you and I will have to break down with that fantasy lens.
Free agency frenzy right around the corner in the NHL. We love that day. It's one of the best days out there, right after the NHL Draft Class or NHL Draft, as well as the Stanley Cup Finals. Can't express enough how excited we are. And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure you're tuning in Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning is when you can find all of our episodes. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there. Have a happy Canada Day weekend, and we shall see you back here again on Monday.
Peace.